Okay, we're all here, so let's get started. I'd like to call to order the April 4th, 2019 meeting of the Cold Spring Zoning Board of Appeals. I'm Aaron Wolf, I'm the chair of the board, and we also have Eric Worth, Grace Lowe, Donald McDonald, and John Martin on that end. We are unpaid volunteers, we're residents of the village, and we're all appointed by the Board of Trustees. I think everybody here is pretty well aware of that at this point. We've got two jobs. One is to grant or deny variances to the code when requested by property owners, and the second part, which we don't do as often, is interpret the village zoning code if there's a difference of opinion between the building department and a property owner or neighbor property owner. So tonight we've got three projects on the agenda. Let me also say thank you to Michael Mell, our board secretary, who takes our minutes, and also in the back office, Jeff V, who you all know as you come in and with your applications. He does a lot of work for the board too. Okay, so first up is going to be 21 Parsonage. This is a second workshop for this project. We have John First, our attorney, village attorney, here with us to help walk us through some of the issues and understand what's coming before the board and what we need to consider as we look at this application. So Luke and Sam, why don't you come on up and show us what you adapted on the application, and we will then look into which variances are going to be needed and how we can take our next steps.
Okay, so as you're aware, we did meet with the planning department, or with the planning board, and had a meeting with them about the use. The building application was denied, and it was suggested that we have to go to the planning board for the approval of the use. But I think what came out of that mostly was the fact that it is in a single-family residential zone. The current use is less relevant than what we can use, and that is to use it as a single-family home. Also, the doctrine of merger came up a lot at that meeting, and that's something I'm guessing Mr. First is here to assist with as well. My take on that from the code and the way it is played is that we talk about it as merger, but it means the lots really just merge for the zoning purpose, or for building and zoning purpose. Not that the lots actually merge, they remain as separate tax lots. And so the way the code reads is that the lot would lose its legally existing non-conforming status. And that's why in the initial application, we did have a request for an area variance on for the lot size. So we are seeking that for being under the 7,500 square foot.
Mm-hmm.
So we have adopted the plan slightly. What we did add at this point is we added a parking space to the plan. That's the intention, is to include that in there. That location of that space will certainly have an impact on the location of the structure. And as the board is aware, it is the preference of the property owner to keep the structure, which will be the house, as close to where it is at this point. And if you look on what we did provide, it does show there is a square kind of sitting in the middle of the property, and that is where the setbacks come into play. I've also provided you with an overview, which is just a kind of a Google map version of the tax map, and then another copy of the tax map, not as a satellite image, but that shows the square footage on the lots in the rest of the neighborhood, with the property in question, 21 Parsonage, being outlined in dark blue. We provided the plans and a couple of street pictures, which were requested, but not my best work on the printer. So.
Okay, so we're not going to get into the merits of the application right now, but we're going to go through and make sure we understand what all the variances that
Yes.
you would need to do this and that they're all in the application. So let's handle that, and then I'm going to, bring John into the conversation, and we will, get deeper into the issues of the merger and what that means, and, what our process is here, especially with the other boards. Okay, so, so clearly looking at the site plan, we can see you've got a front yard and a side yard variance
That's correct.
that you would need.
That's correct.
Do you have a bulk table, like,
The bulk table was provided, it's not in,
for
not
this?
here, but it is provided.
Oh, okay, so the location of the house hasn't changed.
The location of the house has not changed, the
Mhm.
size of the house has not changed, it's
Okay.
essentially the exact same structure that is there. If possible, that would have been Sam's first choice, is to keep that, but, that's not really
Right,
going,
so that original bulk table you supplied
Yep.
still applies?
still applies.
Got
And we have copies of the original application.
That's correct.
Do you have a copy of
it.
that?
I think I have it in here somewhere.
So I think part of what we would also appreciate from the board is, input as to the location of the house and where it sits. There are differing thoughts on that, and, you know, while it is the preference to keep it there, we're certainly aware of, the neighborhood.
Mhm. And I believe we need 2 parking spots for, by code, don't we? So we
believe so.
would have to get a variance for 1 parking spot on the
Correct.
application. Um, So on the back of the house, there's a fireplace, but that's not surrounded by a deck? Or is that?
No, that's the chimney, that fireplace is
Okay.
the chimney.
So the fireplace accounts for the building coverage going from 363 to 380?
I believe so, because
That's the, yes,
we're not making any changes to the size of the building.
And there's no, then on the, I guess the south side of the building, is there a porch or an overhang,
Just a porch.
and it's not covered?
No.
And how far up does that porch go? I can't quite tell. Is it 13 feet? No. That's the distance. 2.6?
it looks to be 13 feet. 2.6 from the side, from the front yard,
Oh, I see.
and it's 22 deep. Okay. That's actually less than 13.
There it is, 2. Yes, 2.
No, it can't be 13.
No,
I
it's
don't, I don't see it.
I don't think that's,
It's to this line here. I don't see the measurement.
we can certainly add that measurement in.
Okay, what's your best guess there?
It looks to me around 8 to 9, maybe.
Something like that. If that's 13, then that must be.
Is this, yeah, the line to the, what I'm looking at is the line from the south side of the house to the north, side of the parking space appears to be 13 feet. So in just taking off that, you know,
Okay.
with our eyes, kind of guessing that that's about.
And if we look at the design plans, what's the height? Is the height changing?
No.
No,
So it's currently 22 feet?
yes. That was my,
I think it says to Ridge, don't it?
yeah, 22 to Ridge.
Is there an entrance from the street side?
No, the entrance is on the south side.
Off of that little porch serves as the entry.
Green barn, total height 25 foot, 0 and 1/2 inch.
No, not 22.
25.
So village code, it only counts as lot coverage if it has a roof on it, or if it's at grade, or if it's above grade. What's the convention?
I'm fairly certain it needs to be covered with a roof in order to count as lot
I'm not
coverage.
aware of any change in that.
Depending, I don't know, that, if it were a concrete slab, that would be a different matter, but I'm not,
Various different places.
It needs the roof to be counted as coverage,
Okay.
building coverage.
yeah, that's my understanding.
It says for lot coverage is a percentage of the plot or lot covered by the building area. Is that the question you have, is lot
Yeah.
coverage?
Yeah, so building area,
Right, so
And
you
we're-
take the square footage of the building and
Right.
divide that by the lot size.
okay, cause I'm just curious, cause some
Mhm.
places do based on like permeable versus
Yes,
impermeable
so
coverage, so.
this is really, this
is
lot
just
coverage is
building.
really just building coverage.
Okay.
Some do, sometimes lot coverage is defined as, impermeable surfaces, like you said,
Mhm.
so they would take the building and the driveway.
Okay.
But in this case, it's just the building.
I know you probably already said this, but is that you probably had the conversation, is this a deck or a porch beside to the, what would be the east? The double line there,
The double line to the,
this part right here,
yes, that's what we were talking about as the porch and the entry to the house.
and is that, existing or new?
That would be new.
So it would be helpful to label that, as proposed, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have a label and it's, it's not,
Oh,
but it's there, it's,
I think that's
it's sort of
right.
in the middle of the.
oh, proposed wood frame deck, oh, yeah, yeah, okay,
Yeah,
all right.
if you get a chance to look at the property, it's really a barn that's falling down
Right,
or will soon, and
Yeah.
that's all that's there, without a foundation.
all right, yeah, so that, okay, all right, now I'm catching up, okay, all right. Oh, I see, 20 feet.
Okay, are there,
It's like variance. A lot of variance.
yes. Any other questions or considerations about the variances or any that we may have missed? Okay. So for the next part of our discussion, let's bring in the village attorney, John, first. John has been helping the boards understand what the issues are with the nature of the historical nature of how this lot came into existence. And although it was never officially subdivided, it is two separately owned lots and has been for,
At least 1964.
yeah, many years. However, at the time of that this zoning code was enacted, these two lots had the same owner. And there is a merger clause in our code, which I will ask John to explain in a minute, that means that they are essentially one, we look at them as one lot shape for zoning purposes. Or we can grant variances to consider them to be two lots. So, the reason that that's important is because it erases what we think of as the small lot adjustment that allows us to fiddle with the side yard setbacks a little bit. But that part of the code also indicates that we should consider it as one lot. John, did I get that close to
Yeah.
correct? Do you wanna,
No, that's pretty much sums it up. So you have these two tax lots that were created prior to the village enacting zoning. So these tax lots were in existence, and then when the village adopted the zoning in the late '60s, they're still there. But under your code, it says that if these two tax parcels are owned by the same person, when the village adopted zoning, then by operation of law, if they're substandard lots, meaning if they're non-conforming, not big enough, or not wide enough, or not deep enough, by operation of law, the parcels actually merge just for zoning purposes. So you still have two separate tax bills, and still have two separate tax parcels. So the idea is that the goal is to kind of phase out non-conforming lots. So if you have two non-conforming lots and they're owned by the same person, most codes, like your codes, require that person to then merge those lots to create either a conforming lot or at the very least a more conforming lot than what previously exists. So for instance, if these two lots were under different ownership, the merger clause actually wouldn't apply here, but at the time in the 1960s, up until the early 80s, these two lots were owned by the same person. So therefore, they have essentially merged just for zoning purposes when figuring out the zoning calculations, even though they still exist in the county tax records. So they've pretty much acknowledged that because they're here seeking variances. So they're saying, yes, we know we have a substandard lot. So now we need zoning relief. Your code requires X, Y, and Z. We can't meet it, so we need relief from you, zoning board, in order to build a house on this lot.
So would be the intent of the code revision to do away with these two substandard lots?
For non-
Just-
yes.
And only recognize it for development purposes going forward as a single lot? And try to encourage it to
The
remain that way?
idea is to phase out non-conforming lots.
And so as to sort of be disinclined to,
Yeah,
look-
that's the general intent, just about of any code, any non-conformity. The idea is to phase them out over time.
which could be now.
It could be now, so that's why they're here seeking relief. Just like any code provision, they have a right to seek relief or variances from what the code requires.
But would this be like the intent of the trustees to
That would be
pass-
that would be a factor that you would consider, but it's not the end all to end all kind of thing, but that's certainly a factor to consider, is the fact that, the zoning code specifically says this, you're proposing that, which is non-conforming.
So it's something that you just can't completely ignore. I mean, the idea is the code is what the code is, and
Correct.
and it's trying to steer things a certain way. And-
Right, and they're, just like any other application, they're seeking relief, just like any other variance application you deal with. Any application you have, somebody's trying to seek relief for something that's not permitted by the code. And it goes against the intent of the code pretty much.
Are
So-
some type of code provisions a little bit more significant than others with regards to developing, and changes or seeking variances?
It might all depend on the situation, really. Could be.
I think, if I could just say
Sure,
one
I
thing.
just.
I would think that, variance is a variance is a variance, and we apply that, the same balancing test to, as you would to a side yard, you'd apply it to this request as well, would be my take on it, and that, so you do factor it in, but I don't think,
But the
as you
difference-
said, it's not a be all and an end all.
Say the difference between a side yard variance as opposed to an entire lot type perspective. This is what in essence you're looking at.
Right.
Right, so you'd definitely be looking at, it would have more community character impacts.
This is what I'm getting at.
The substantialness of it. But there's more of a community character impact for a lot area variance as opposed to just a side yard setback, especially if you're talking about a deck.
Yeah, I'm just
Or
trying to
even
put
a
things in
house.
perspective on
Right.
the issue here, that's all.
Right.
Thanks.
Absolutely right.
And I'll just say one thing that was brought up at the planning board was, Catherine Fatty asked something about, I wonder how many, you know, lots there are like this. And I was able to do a quick search, and so I'm not saying this is at all exhaustive, but there appear to be about 5 lots in the village that are under the same ownership or very similar ownership. One is, you know, husband and wife own one lot, and the adjacent one is just the wife or just the husband. So there aren't a lot of these problems out there. I have no way of knowing from 1967 when zoning was passed how many of these merged lots were actually developed over the years, because if you look at the tax map from that time, there certainly are a lot of lots that weren't. So, you know, that I didn't get into that, but just as far as what exists in the village today, I think there are only, you know, very few.
So would the point be made then that this would not lead to a bad precedent?
That would be the argument.
Is
I would
that
make,
what you're
certainly.
insinuating?
That would be my argument, certainly, that,
And how will we distinguish your particular lot
Sure.
situation? I mean, I guess, I'm sure everything's fact-driven, but it becomes,
yeah,
you know, a little bit more tricky when you're dealing with a whole lot issue
absolutely.
and how, you know, it's something that the board doesn't deal with on a regular basis. As you pointed out, there's so few of these.
Right.
And,
So I think the distinction with ours over, you know, again, the lots that I have discovered is that our lot is actually under separate ownership now. And it's been, since the 80s, it's transferred under as 2 separate lots. A lot of what I see, you know, again, this is just a broad brush of what I've been able to look at through the tax map quickly, is the other lots are, you know, Jane Smith and Jane Smith. And, you know, so it's the same person currently owns them. There don't appear to be anything that I could really find that would trace directly to this situation here. and
Just
the
out
way
of
it's
curiosity,
treated.
when the lot was purchased, how did the title company reference to this?
Well, the title company, because it's listed on the county tax map as rural vacant land, that's the tax designation. So it was insured as a vacant parcel. And we did have Sam and I I met with Greg Warner at the time and talked to him about the property.
Were there any exceptions within the title report with regards to the ability to build on it? Or
The title company,
They wouldn't-
they're not gonna insure against building on a lot.
Correct.
They're just insuring ownership easements, those types of things.
Mhm.
But they're not gonna insure that this is buildable for a single-family home.
Yeah, all they really provided us with was title back to, you know, when it had the joint owners and going forward. And for our due diligence on the buildability, or the ability to build on it, we relied on our conversations and meetings with the building department.
John, so we are fairly clear that we do not need a change of use for this because it's a lot in the residential district and the plan is to use it for residential use. Is that?
Well, I guess that would be an issue for the planning board. I don't think so. I really haven't looked into that issue. Because I think the bigger issue is trying to get these variances. But I think my initial take was I didn't think they needed formal change of use approval from the planning board. But-
Matt? Was I wrong in hearing that the planning board did not think a change of use was necessary, or do you,
I
are you
think we
not
kinda
sure yet?
tabled it.
I mean, it came to us because it was referred to us by the building
Right.
inspector, and until such time as it would be pulled back, I mean, we typically don't look at site plan in the R1. But this is highly unusual because that you're kind of talking about an accessory structure, right, having a change of use, right? And when you go back to the merger clause, which basically looks at the 4 corners of the 2 lots together, that lot already has a residence on it, right?
That's a big point.
Yeah, so I think that's what the thinking could have been, is just that this is so unusual, what are you really doing?
In essence, if it's deemed to be technically a merged lot, as far as it's recognized in the zoning code, you usually don't have 2 separate residences built on that same lot.
you know,
Yeah, and to John's point, that's the legislative intent at zoning enactment, to reduce or eliminate as much. This one fully eliminated the nonconformity.
That's an issue.
However, if we grant variances to build on there, then we're essentially saying it's a residential lot, and you probably, I wouldn't think, need a change of use to construct something that's
Yeah,
allowed.
honestly, I haven't really, again, if they can't get the variances, then it's a moot point,
Okay.
so.
I
my
think
goal
they're
is-
separate issues.
So what you're
it's not
saying is we
really-
shouldn't worry about that?
You guys shouldn't worry about it.
Okay.
No.
And they only have to worry about it unless you guys grant the variances. I
It,
didn't wanna spend a lot of time and money spinning our wheels on that issue.
it doesn't decide the
It could be
issue
moot.
of use.
Right.
And, or the merging, or the eventual planning of what the lot is gonna, how it's gonna be used.
Right, I mean, the issue you guys look at are the
This is just a
variances,
technical-
what variances they need and applying the 5 factors to each variance request.
With regards to this structure, wherever it's gonna be,
Right.
and it doesn't
Now, the
necessarily.
planning board's gonna look at it anyway, because once you get a complete application, you're gonna refer it over as per your code, for their recommendation. So either way, the planning board's gonna look at it. It's a question of whether they're gonna have a formal review after, if and after the variances are granted, or if it's just gonna be this informal recommendation.
So we could even put in verbiage into our decision that it has no reference to the validity of the lot's use as a private residence. It's just simply technical. I mean, if that makes any difference,
Right, I mean, the change of use, I think, would just trigger a site plan approval.
Yeah.
So, anytime you have site plan approval, the use is basically permitted as of right, subject to planning board approval for site plan issues.
So we've already referred this to planning once. Do we need to do that again
Yeah, I think they
as a
need,
formal?
yeah, because they didn't have a complete application and, I think they're, I don't think they have this supplemental submission. The planning board looked at it the first time around because I think the applicant wanted to get a sense of some site plan issues they may have had and get some feedback from the planning board on that.
Okay.
so we're just talking about, right here today, about the situs of this building on that particular lot and how that fits within the zoning regulations, and that's it. It's making no decision with regards to what's gonna go forward as far as the use of the premises or the lot.
Well, I guess eventually at some point you're going to decide whether to grant the variances or not.
Well, yeah, that's, right, that's just what
I
we're
mean,
doing.
I thought we were here in a workshop just to
Yeah,
make sure
this
the
is-
application is
right.
ready to get to a public hearing where we
Yeah.
can
Oh,
talk
I'm
all
sorry.
about that stuff.
Yeah, eventually, I'm talking about.
That's right.
Oh,
But we also wanna
Yeah, I
figure
think
out,
Done.
we also wanna understand what the procedure is so that everybody knows where they're going next and what we're waiting for before we can have the public
Right.
hearing. So we need a formal opinion from the planning board based on the new application,
Yeah, the supplemental information and.
okay? And, go ahead.
The only supplemental information was just the spot, the
Mhm.
parking spot.
Okay.
That's I mean, maybe but I thought we're gonna need to go to one or the other, either way. I'm sorry, we're gonna need to deal with both issues either way. And we went to the planning board for their interpretation on, whether we needed a use permit, and they
Yeah.
sent us back, a change of use.
Mhm.
They sent us back here saying it wasn't right for them to decide that at that point, and they were,
Well, because,
until we know whether the variances are granted.
correct.
So we're gonna finish here with not today,
No,
we're gonna finish with the zoning board before we go back to planning for the
Correct.
use. Okay. I just wanted to make
because
sure
if
that
they
we
don't
were.
grant the variances, then when you guys,
Correct.
everyone's keep referring to a change of use.
Yeah.
The use is permitted, it's just
Right.
if you're changing uses from accessory to a full dwelling, that is what triggers site plan review from the planning board. Just like when you have a change of use, when you have an office on Main Street change to a retail, that's a change of use, and that triggers site plan review. So the uses are permitted, so I just understand that's,
Yeah, I didn't mean to use the term as that way,
Right.
it was more what Matt said,
Right.
having two private residents on a single
Right, so
merged lot, that's the issue. One of the primary issues. And it's also substandard.
substandard, that's the big issue. It's a substandard lot, they're trying to build a house on it.
Okay, so I think it would be helpful before our public hearing to have something from the planning board, a little more formal than reading through the minutes. Is there any new information? Do you think that the planning board needs anything else, Matt, or should we?
I think what I would like to see is, we don't, as far as I'm concerned, as John says, we don't really have a whole lot to talk about until we know whether or not you're gonna undertake these variances. In my mind, you know, the first consideration of a very large area variance creates, the village is taking an active role in creating a substandard non-conforming lot, right? You know, so I think the planning board needs to understand what the zoning board wants to do, and what I'd like to see is a very detailed description on the 5 factors as to what the logic is as to why you're granting these variances, right? Because obviously, the code says that you grant the minimal amount of variances that you have to, right? To you know, for a project to go forward. So while this is such a, you know, a unique situation, and you know, you count 5 lots, you're forgetting Marathon, which is another 32 lots. Right? So the numbers, it's going up. And that's just the ones that we know of, right? Because it's very difficult to research this stuff. So these lots merged, and that's the legislative intent of zoning, right? And when the legislative body undertakes that's clearly their intent. So I think what the planning board would need to see is really how and why the action that the zoning board is saying, you know, that they're taking before giving an opinion. I mean, otherwise we don't really have anything.
Well, I mean, they haven't decided anything yet, so I think you're probably looking for some information from the applicant to show how they meet the 5 factors.
Well, that would be, right, that would have to be part of the public hearing. I'm hearing from you that you would like, after the zoning board makes an opinion one way or another, you want it detailed, is that?
Well, it seems like you guys have a very big question in front of you, and an unusual question at that. So I would think that you would want to have the public hearing, take the public input, see obviously that should have some bearing on which direction you're gonna go.
And
On
where
top-
you might go.
Well,
Or the
sure.
planning board.
Sure, yeah,
You're gonna issue, under the code, they can refer variances over to the planning board for a recommendation before they
prior to
act.
taking action.
Prior to taking action.
Is that how it, well, without question, there's no point in asking us for an opinion after they've taken action, right?
Correct.
But I would think you would want to, seems to me that a better process would be to hold the public hearing open, right? Hold the comment period open as well, and then ask the advice of the planning board based upon what direction.
From the information presented
Yeah.
at the
I
public
think
hearing.
that would be the right way.
Because
Okay. So you
because
can-
this is such a huge decision, right?
Right.
That I don't know that the planning board wants to kind of opine on things and A, influence the decision, right? And B, kind of start to talk about what ifs that may or may not happen.
Our decision here would be less critical in the end. I mean, it'll have input, it'll bring the public out to have a comment on it, and it'll give you a scope of understanding of how the lot might be used, but it wouldn't finally decide the issue that you're being presented with on the development.
Yeah, I think the gating issue to me is really, is to create, in essence, create a non-standard lot, right?
So I guess what I would be hoping for the planning board to let us know in advance is give us the expertise that we don't have on this board, which is to look at this and say, well, you can't put a parking spot there because historically that causes an increase of accidents of 20%. Or that if you have houses that are this close to the sidewalk, burn down at a 50% greater rate. I don't know, things of that nature that have to do with the actual location of the buildings on the lot, rather than should this be created as a small non-conforming lot.
I think we were very clear in the meeting that, to the extent that you can, you reduce conformity as much as you can, right? So if there is a 10-foot side yard setback and you're parking the car in it, you at least have the defensibility of saying it's a conforming side yard, right? The
Yeah,
applicant-
that's the kind of stuff we know all about. What Aaron is saying is right, I think I agree with him. He's saying we want your expertise from the planning board in terms of planning board issues. For instance, location of parking spots and backing out into a street, and how do we do it in other places in the village, and threat of fire to a neighbor. That's the kind of planning board issues that you guys are expert on. And that's the kind of thing that the code does ask us to reach out to you to get opinions on. The terms of the balancing act with the side yard and all that stuff, we know all about that. We do that day and night. But the planning board issues, what Aaron said, I back up what he said. That's what we would be asking
Right,
for
'cause
you on your.
I think you identifying those types of issues will help them apply the balancing test.
Right, exactly. Well,
Because they probably don't realize all the site plan issues that you guys deal with all the time.
when you go through,
Right.
you know, a commercial property somewhere, you're evaluating the parking and is there enough, and you're evaluating the street, you know, the site distances and all those things that planning board does.
Right.
And that's the kind of thing, input we would like from you guys,
And so that,
to the extent that you can.
based on the information that you have in front of you,
Right,
the plan that you currently
Yes.
see, right?
right.
And what happened, and what changed on that plan?
The parking spaces.
Addition of the parking space.
They just added the parking.
It's up against the Gerland house, I assume?
Not directly.
Yeah.
Actually, that was something I did ask for at the last workshop, was giving us where the other buildings are. Maybe your Google map shows that, I don't know. Does it show that?
It should, yeah. To answer your question, I've got 6 yards from that.
It's what,
Okay.
About 6 feet from that side yard,
6 feet?
So that's the
From the
driveway?
property line.
from the property line, yes.
Right. I guess we have that.
So, I think that we should request that, that opinion from the planning board. And I don't know, Matt, what do you want from us? You want a new application? They've got some things here that'll be helpful, I think, for your board to
I
look
think
at.
that's good, and then I guess whether or not they come from you or from the applicant, the logic on considering, you know, on the 5 factors of the variance, because it's a big ask, right? So to kind of understand what, you know, what we're being asked and what the logic is behind, you know,
I think we're just asking, what are the planning considerations of this plan that they brought before us? And if you say, no, this plan doesn't work, then maybe they say, okay, let's rethink the plan. I don't know how much time they have to spend on getting something that the planning board approves, but if you tell us that this is a horrible plan, that's really going to affect, our balance, you know, the way we balance the factors. But if you don't, you know, if there's no problem with the safety of the parking or the location of this house right there in the front side corner of their lot, then that's, I think, what we're looking for. Not necessarily an opinion on how it fits in with the zoning code and the variances
Right, but
that we.
if they have a full application and understanding of, you know, from the applicant or somebody, like a narrative, it might help them.
right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's all, you know, you can't just separate the site plan issues and the 5
Right.
factors, because the 5 factors it talks about environmental impacts, it talks about community character impacts. So how you arrange the site plan will affect the environment and the community character, so they're not completely separate.
Okay, I just don't
There
wanna,
is some crossover.
I don't wanna waste the planning board's time and the applicant's time. If it's gonna be the same meeting that you had last time, I don't want you to do that again. We already have that information. That's my main point. So if you think that there's more information about the site plan and the planning board nature of what you do, then we would like to hear that, I think. But if not, then we'll assume that we've heard it and,
Well, I think,
Consider
there's no rush, because you have to schedule a public hearing, you need so many days anyway, and the planning board meets, when's your next meeting?
The
Next
next one's
week?
next Thursday.
Next Thursday, so I mean, it's not going to hold them up or anything like that, if they have to go back to the planning board.
Yeah, it should be a complete application with some sort of logic around the 5 factors. Otherwise, like John said, you can't separate the two. It's not, that's just not how it works.
Well, we get the public hearing and see what the neighborhood says and see what we feel and hear their, you know, you're gonna go through all this that you've done in spades, the
Yes.
public hearing, and, we
Right.
can,
And if the particular plan is not feasible and if we don't grant what is needed, it doesn't mean they can't come back and have a different plan before us.
Correct.
Okay, so then we'll refer it back to the planning board again, and, we'll see what the planning board says.
Correct.
The next thing that I wanted to bring up on this is whether we also want to hear what the historic review board says before we, or as part of the public hearing.
Can I ask for clarification?
Sure.
We are going to, you are going to hold a public hearing, and in between now and the time the public hearing occurs, we will meet with planning? Or are you waiting
Yes.
for us to be done with planning before you schedule that public?
No, I think they wanna schedule a public hearing,
Okay.
because I think the planning board, before they make their final recommendation, they may wanna hear the comments and the presentation before they make their final recommendation.
That's,
So you may, depending on if you wanna meet with the planning board before the public hearing, or just wait for them till after the public hearing.
We don't have, you're saying we don't have to wait, we could have the public hearing and then go to planning, is that right?
We're gonna keep the
Yes.
public hearing open until we get the recommendation from
Correct.
planning, whether you have it,
Right.
before the public hearing or after.
But it sounds like they wanna wait
Matt, do
till
you have a
after.
preference?
I'm sorry, was it?
Do you have a preference whether we see you before the public hearing or after the public hearing?
It would be good to have the input of the public hearing. I think that's the fastest route to a decision, right? To figure out what the public's input is, you know, and obviously it's the whole
So
point.
why don't you wait till after the public hearing before going for the informal recommendations of the planning board, and then,
Perfect.
so if they're gonna have to keep the public hearing open,
Understood.
you know, given the magnitude of the application and the importance, it's, you know, so,
Understood.
Okay,
I think, so we got that all kinda worked out with the planning board? I
yeah,
think
so let's move on to the
we
historic
beat that.
review board.
So,
So I think it would be a good idea for us to just check in with them and make sure that, we know what the options are so that we can grant the minimum variances required. The historic review board might say, this is a historic structure, the siding cannot be moved from that location. So, so it has to be here or we're not gonna let you tear down that building. However, they might say, this building is worthless, we don't care what you do. And then maybe we say, well, we know it doesn't have to stay in the same spot anymore, let's move it back from the street a little bit. So I'm curious whether we can get their, well, I know we can get their input, I think I would like to do that as part of our collecting knowledge on.
We met with them as actually the first stop, and they said it was not worth their time until they got zoning and planning. It's a little bit of a,
Nobody wants to go.
hot potato.
So what I'd like to suggest is that I will contact the historic review board and ask them for their,
Came
Just
from a workshop.
for a summary on what they talked about, and just to confirm
Yeah.
that they don't have anything to say about it.
And they do have a full set of design plans showing the rendering and, right?
They have the renderings, I don't,
Okay, well, they certainly have renderings of the exterior and what has been proposed.
Okay.
But we can provide whatever, if you think there's anything else you would like, we can provide that too.
Okay. So it sounds like then our procedure should be, we have a complete application, so we could set a public hearing. We can ask for these reviews by the two other boards. We hold a public hearing. We wait to collect the input from these other boards if we don't have it yet. We continue the public hearing and then we discuss with all the information at hand and then we take a vote. So we're probably looking at, two more meetings with the zoning board for this, both of them being the public hearing.
mhm.
Is that,
And when we leave it open, and it comes back to us, when we try to make our final
Mhm.
determination after hearing back from the other boards, do we renotice it?
No, as long as there's a date certain,
right,
so, you guys meet regularly once, was it once a month, twice a month? twice, so as long as, even if you don't, you can always do a special meeting or whatever. As long as there's a date certain during the public hearing when you say, okay, we are holding it open until such and such date.
One thing we didn't talk to Historic about was reducing variances and what, if they would push back on any of that. So we could, which I think was what you were saying, right, is if we could reduce variances by making a historic,
Location.
concession, you know, then maybe that would be worth considering. Was that right? Did I understand that correctly?
Well, I haven't read the minutes of that meeting or watched the video, so I wanted the board to know what the historic review board said, so that we can make sure that we're not promising you something that we know they're not gonna give, or that once we know what they say, we'll see that it's clearly not gonna work. We just wanna know what, especially because it's a demo of a building, and they might say it's worthless and tear it down, and then we've got some more options. So, I think we should then go ahead and schedule the public hearing.
Could we just go through the
Oh,
list of
sure.
variances, so we
Oh,
know
right.
exactly
Okay.
which variance, which code section, what the code requires and what they're proposing, so that way when we prepare the notice, everything is, there's no mistakes.
Isn't that listed down somewhere already?
Well, we've got lot size.
Yeah, so I can go through the list, I put a list together as we were talking.
Okay, so did I.
So the first one I have is the off-street parking,
Mhm.
code requires 2, you're providing 1, correct? Everyone's okay with that one? Then the second one is the lot area, code requires 7,500 square feet, you're proposing 3,360,
Yes.
right? Okay, then lot width, code requires 75 feet, you've got 48.
Yes.
Then lot depth, code requires 75 and you're proposing 70. And then I have the front yard, code requires 25 feet, you've got 2.2 feet.
Yes.
Okay, and then each side yard, so each side yard has to be, code requires 10 feet, and you've got 1.5 feet on one side yard. The other one's okay.
Correct.
And then there's this code provision, you guys, the code requires 50 by 50 square within a lot. So I'm assuming you don't meet that because you've got a 48-foot lot width, unless it's shaped weird, but I don't think it's tapered.
It doesn't appear to be taken.
Right, so you can't get a 50 by 50 square, you can only get a 48 by 50. So I've got 7 variances. And then the lot coverage, we're good on that, I guess you're less than 20%.
Mhm.
Height is only 2 stories, right?
Yes.
Okay, and that's the one that's,
You finding anything else there as you?
no, I
I
think
know, I don't wanna
that's,
keep looking.
well, I just wanna make sure we get it right the
Yeah,
first
no.
time, so we don't have to have another public hearing and do
Yes.
another notice. Cause then everyone looks at me and says, oh, you screwed up.
Anything about minimum size, dwelling unit size?
I think 600 square feet is the
Yeah.
minimum size? There's no maximum. I'm assuming
So you'll be 700 something, so I guess you'll be over
Just
that.
over,
they,
yeah.
Um,
Just wanna add that the reason that we requested that the building be where it is right now was under the assumption, perhaps incorrect assumption, that it would be the least friction just to sort of redo it where it stands. But there's no other reason why we need to leave it there. So our goal is to get through these 3 meetings or these 3 boards smoothly. And so I'm not opposed to moving the building if that's what it takes. But then we have to, of course, consider historic at the same time, but, you know, we're looking for the smoothest path. I thought the smoothest path would be leaving it where it is, but if it's not the case, then we should consider moving it.
I think, we're going to be highly influenced by the neighbors on that question. So you should work that out. You can talk to them in advance, I mean, if you want.
You can make that, I mean, during your presentation, during the public hearing, you can note that. I mean, I think you're right, there's pros and cons for both locations.
And if that, this is my first time doing something like this, in the event that in the public hearing, that conversation comes up and then we agree that it should be moved, then do we go back, make new plans, come back, resubmit, and then does the whole process start over, or does it?
No,
No,
no.
we're gonna leave it open for that.
Right, it's
You
just
should
part of the.
understand, ultimately, you might be denied completely, okay? Just because we're having this conversation tonight about maybe move this and that and the other, it's all pie in the sky. You might ultimately, after paying your attorney and working through 2 hearings and listening to neighbors and the whole thing, you might ultimately get nothing.
Understood.
Just so you understand.
You're not planning a shed of any kind?
No.
And the fence is, are you putting in a fence?
No.
Okay, and it's not gonna be an Airbnb? Okay. That's in the code, although, anyway, we won't get into that yet. So why don't we schedule the opening of the public hearing for our next meeting, if possible, which is the 18th of April. Is that, do we have enough board members who will be here during spring break?
Could we talk a little bit about noticing the neighborhood and timing on that? I wanna make sure, my opinion is we should make sure that the neighborhood knows about what this is, what's happening here.
Sure. Well, this is, this is about the same amount of time that we always have between
Right.
workshops and public hearings. If we think that there is,
Well,
I
keep
don't
in
know.
mind, the public hearing is gonna be held open anyway, because they have to wait for the planning board referral. So the neighbors will have 2 opportunities, but, yeah, I think it's a good idea to kind of confirm where exactly, the mailing requirements.
right, yeah, we'll
Get
we'll
some,
do
'cause
that.
I think you're within 500 feet of the border for Nelsonville. If that's the case, then they have to get notice of the public hearing as well.
2:30, do we have to do a 2:39?
And if you're within 500 feet, I think that's a state road,
239
right
now.
up there? 301 is state on the other side of
Right.
9D.
Right.
So you have to do 239 and referral to the county.
Right.
So that Jeff needs a,
For a new curb cut, does anyone else have to weigh in on this for the village, or is this just?
maybe the DPW foreman, or
It should be what
it's
the
a village,
procedure was.
yeah, it's a village road. That's a good, you know what, I'll see if they have any specific driveway regulations. I mean, there's an existing barn and garage there, is there a curb cut there? Where the,
I'm not sure. I don't think so,
okay.
but
It's a really low curve though, isn't it?
yeah,
Like 3
it's
inches or
grass,
something.
so I'm not sure.
Some codes have requirements where you can't have driveways within 5-10 feet of each other. You know, it's a village road, so if, I mean, if you wanna send a set of plans to the DPW foreman, just so he knows. You have to check the code, or the building inspector would have noted that. I don't think you guys have any regulations on driveways.
No. No,
Oh, wait, here, street openings and driveways. Yeah, there is an application procedure for a driveway, 108. But I think that's just before the building department. So I would just send a copy of it to the building inspector and the highway foreman,
okay,
and just note the driveway, Article 2, Chapter 108.
okay. So let's pull out the application, which I think might need to be updated now that we have the full list of
Yes.
the variances. And so that we can get that in case anybody wants to come in and look at it.
Right.
And then let's look at the people who get notified. So, I always like to go with anybody, in addition to the immediate neighboring properties, anybody who's gonna see the property. And that's, what are the addresses on there? List. So you've got this list.
Yes.
So we have 36 and 34 Pine,
Yes.
and what about the one down from that? They will, they can probably see it from the back of their house.
Okay.
I mean, I can't, tree coverage isn't really an issue,
Right.
so that might be 32, I don't know.
So 34 and 32.
And then we've got the one immediately next door,
Right.
the 3 or 4 right across the street on Parsons.
We did 3. You wanna do the 4th up?
Yeah, I think they've got a pretty good view
Okay.
of that. And then I would also go, across the corner
Across the corner
to,
to, staying on the corner of Parsons and Pine?
so the opposite corner,
Yes.
and then the corner across Pine,
Okay.
and the house right next to that. Are you following me, Donald? Does that all make sense
House
to you?
right next.
I think I'd add up Parsonage further, a couple more. I go to like, you know, I can take over to right here. I mean, you know, what we're talking about is right here, I mean, you know, here's the neighborhood, here's the neighborhood.
You would do 1, 2, 3, 4. You wanna
5,
go
6, 7, 8.
all the way to here?
And I go 1, 2, 3, 4. I would do the neighborhood. And then you hit the borders here, but, it's my opinion, I mean, you know, I'm only one of 5 or 6 here, but it's an important project, and we wanna make sure that the neighborhood knows about it.
Yeah, it is, it's a different type of set of variances that are being sought here. Quite a number in the first place. So it's not your typical application. We just wanna make sure we do it right.
We've got these two, this one, and Donald makes a good point, so let's get the,
Including, basically,
Just all the way up Parsonage to,
the top of the hill?
sure, spend
the neighborhood.
an extra $20, here ensures a little bit of safety of having everybody notified.
Mhm.
So the procedure is, John's gonna write this one, I think, When that's ready, we will send you the notification that gets mailed. You're gonna take it to the post office and get return receipt requested. I'll send you a list of instructions. You need to come and see Jeff and get a, public hearing sign. That's gonna be in the yard from 10 days before the opening of the hearing, all the way through the close of the hearing, so, a month or so. We need to get the updated application into the village office so that the public can come in and look at it.
Will the sign be ready by Monday, the mailing and the sign be ready Monday? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
What's the date again we're talking about?
18th.
18th.
Is anybody gonna be gone?
So the mailings have to go out by the 8th,
Um,
the sign has to go up by the 8th, 10 days before.
That's
And
Monday.
you have publication in the local paper.
right, so that runs twice. That'll run on the 10th and the 17th.
Okay. Alright, so everything has to be done.
Right, happens right away, starting tomorrow morning.
Got it.
If something falls apart, we'll just push it back a couple weeks and that's what has to happen.
Mhm.
All right, any other,
Oh, and just make sure you send a copy to the village of Nelsonville, village clerk, because they're
Yes.
required to be noticed.
And the county, so.
Well, Jeff will have,
It goes to the county.
clerk will take care of the county once he gets a complete application, has to go over to the county planning department. Cause I think I'm pretty sure it's within 500 feet of Nelsonville, I'm almost positive. And then it might even be 500 feet of 301. But either way, it triggers county referral.
and what's triggering it is the change in the use of the building?
No, what's triggering it is the request for variances. So anytime you have an application for variances or an application for site plan approval, whether it's a use variance or an area variance and within 500 feet of a state or county road or municipal
Okay.
boundary, it has to get referred to the county planning department, and they're supposed to look for county-wide impacts. And this application doesn't, I can't imagine any county-wide impacts. Obviously, there's probably a lot of impacts within the village, but it's not going to impact countywide, but you're required, it's actually a jurisdictional requirement to send it over to the county, and they have 30 days, so you can't act, so you wouldn't be able to act at the next public hearing anyway on the 18th, because you have to give them 30 days.
Okay,
So that would be another reason we'd have to hold it open anyway. So the sooner we get that full application over to the county, the quicker that 30 days clock starts.
okay.
But again, I can't imagine them having any real comments on this, but procedurally, you're required to do it or else it's a jurisdictional defect.
So we're gonna need to do this for Peter Farrell's shed on the corner of Main and 90.
Yeah, 90 state road, state highway,
Can we
right?
do it for my neighbor's shed?
Good question.
I don't think so.
We made an agreement with the,
I was gonna say, do you have a separate agreement with
Yeah,
the
we
county
made an
plan?
agreement
Sometimes they might
years
not
ago.
want sheds or decks.
because we've got crazy, we
Right.
were doing 239Ms on a little shed.
So
We have an agreement.
Jeff,
So we'll look into that.
have Jeff look that up.
So we're gonna we'll probably add a clause. If we grant your shed, we'll add a clause to make sure that that's been taken care of before you get your building permit. Does that sound right, John?
Oh, I think so.
I'm sorry, I'm talking to, looking beyond you to Peter.
Right, for his application?
Yeah,
You just have Jeff check, cause like Donald said, a lot of times the counties will have
Okay.
separate agreements with the municipalities and they'll tell them, don't send me over stuff on sheds and decks. On this application, you should send it over because this is
A house.
a house.
okay, so I guess we're done.
Okay,
And,
thank you.
We'll follow up tomorrow.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much.
See you thereafter.
And the other
Thanks a
thing
lot.
is, procedurally, under secret, this would be a type 2 action, because these are all variances in connection with a single family home. So I know they submitted a short form EAF, but
Mhm.
you don't have to make any determinations under secret, because it's exempt under the state regs.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. And John, you're
I'm done,
probably
yes.
done also.
Yes, yes, you're you're not kicking me out?
Let's keep.
Don't let the door hit you on the way out?
You're very helpful, you're welcome to stay if you want, but I'm not sure.
No, that's
who's gonna
okay,
pay
I'm
you.
just gonna finish my notes and I'll be out of here.
Okay. All right, does anybody want to break before we jump into the public hearing? Okay. Come on up, Peter.
I guess my official presentation.
So let me just open the public hearing. This is, I'll pull out your application. Okay, thank you. Excellent. Great.
I believe that was it for the document.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, John. Bye. John.
Did you need the updated site plan as well? I don't know if you
Has it been
printed
updated again? Oh, I
No,
have to-
no, the last one you sent on the 28th. I don't know if you printed it out.
No, I don't print things
I try not to as well.
for applicants. So this has the updated area?
Yeah, the conformance, you gotta adjust that.
Okay. So we have okay, so I'd like to open the public hearing for application for variance at 191 Main. We have an application for a shed in front and side yard setback. This is on a corner lot. I want to start by talking about what I found is the relevant code that we're looking at. It's all under 13417 accessory buildings and garages. It can be located in any required side or rear yard. It cannot exceed 1.5 stories. It doesn't. It has to be set back 10 feet from any lot line, and this is where we have a variance that's required. We need a variance for the side yard, which is the one east, and we need for the front yard, which is the one facing 90 and across the church. There's another part of this that we didn't really talk about before, which is that no accessory buildings shall project nearer to the street on which the principal building fronts than such principal building. Now, corner lots have 2 front yards, but in this one, the building clearly fronts on Main Street and not on more Chestnut. So I don't know that we need to consider that, but we want to confirm that idea as we get into the discussion. There's also a provision in there for difficult slopes, which I think your lot has because it slopes back immediately, doesn't it, from the position where you're putting the shed.
You're talking beyond that surface,
Yeah, you're putting the shed and then it drops down, right?
a couple of feet behind it, yeah,
Okay,
if not immediately.
okay. And that is, those are the variances that we're looking at. So, Peter, make your presentation to the public and to the board.
Yeah, and I did talk to all my neighbors, and they're like, good luck, and basically I'm putting the shed in the driveway. The location, I think you guys looked at on Google Maps, I did print it out. I didn't have a yellow highlighter, unfortunately, so I couldn't circle that location, but, if you guys wanna see where it's gonna be going,
Can you pass this back out?
Google Maps perspective. It's a 10 by 14 shed. It's gonna look similar to what I have here. That is not the shed, but it's gonna be made of the same material. Same size. And that's really it.
Here's the site plan. Just note that the area of the shed is different than the actual area of the plan is not updated. We have one updated copy.
Yeah, and the design of the shed, I put the 10 by 14 that you guys had.
Great. We've got the referral from planning board, we've got these notices, let's just make sure. everything's okay.
You were saying something about your neighbor's shed? Where is that?
It's further back. It's actually,
It's out in this lot.
they were here, I guess, a few weeks back. They would be 6 Chestnut.
So your existing driveway, is that, I walk by it all the time, but I don't remember now. I mean, is it at the level of Chestnut Street, so the shed is up, even though it's a big drop down of the land, or is it,
The driveway's on Chestnut Street, so it's level with the street.
so it's.
It's level with the street.
This is level across.
This is level all the
Isn't
way to
there
the
like a
back.
big retaining wall there,
There's a retaining wall here and it's dropping down here,
dropping down here?
but this is all level.
All right,
This
so
is
you
actually
got
on as-
some kind of retaining wall thing going here?
There is, we built like a rock wall.
Right, okay, all right. So this is gonna be right next door to the gates that we
Yeah.
looked at?
I think it's gonna be in front of the gate, actually.
Oh, the
Yeah, it will
gate.
be,
I
actually.
heard about the gate.
Nice
You
gate.
found the gate?
They were 50 feet back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a number I remember too.
Right. The driveway goes like this, and the gates are back here.
So you said earlier that you actually have more space behind the shed?
There's more space.
you could
There's a
slide
couple
it-
of feet.
You could slide it back further
I could go to the edge, I prefer not to.
to the edge of your property?
To the edge of the asphalt. I prefer to have like a little buffer zone behind there. As much as I can, with your guidance, of course, but if I could not be on the edge, it's just, I still have property behind that goes down.
So you've got, from that corner, you've got about 2.5 feet, and then how far does the asphalt?
Where are you referring to?
So you've got, right in here, that's 2.5 feet,
In here it's about 2.5 feet.
right there, between that corner and your property line.
Oh, that's gonna be more than 2.5 feet. From the shed to the property line?
From that corner of the shed.
Yeah, to that property line, that's gonna be more than 2.5 feet. But this is actually down, this section of my property here.
Mhm.
That's where it starts to,
All right,
that
so,
sunken backyard that's over here
Were you asking about the
extends
asphalt?
around, it's kinda
yeah.
like,
Yeah,
and
So-
then this is all up.
So I'm
So
confused.
this section of the property is all elevated,
I got it,
this is all
got
kind
it.
of a sunken backyard.
So you're saying this, the site plan shows this as 2 feet and 7 inches, and you're saying that's not correct?
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay, so where's the asphalt in here is what I wanna know.
The asphalt, well, in here, I couldn't tell you where it is in here, but the asphalt would be right on the edge of the shed.
So it goes like this.
Yeah. And then the cinder, there's asphalt and there's cinder block, so it's, I'm guessing around maybe
Okay.
8 inches on the cinder block and maybe like a foot on the asphalt.
So the line of this wall here continues and goes like that? Some kind of
This
This isn't a
wall?
wall,
This
is
is,
it?
these are hedges,
What is that?
hedges.
But
Greenery.
there's not a wall.
Oh,
This
okay.
is
There's
at the
a
level of the
couple of
neighbors.
low lying rock, there's a low lying rock wall
Right, okay, all right.
that runs along the edge here.
All right.
Is that actual height of the shed, Joan, is it 12 feet?
No, I think it says 10 feet 10 inches.
Oh, there it is, 10. So, okay.
And I think the building inspector said it could even go higher. For what it's worth.
If you get the variance.
Well, he was saying, yeah, technically you can go X, and I said, all right, but I'm not looking, I wasn't looking to go that high.
Anybody have any questions? For Peter? Karen, commentary? No. So do we have should we close the public hearing and discuss at this point? Nobody has
I
any
move to
comments?
close the public hearing. Are there any questions?
I second the motion.
Okay, all in favor of closing the public hearing?
Last thing, we receive all the notice certificates?
Yeah, we have the notices, the sign is, the
So
sign has been up.
nobody's present here to speak?
Nobody's
Or
here to
against.
speak, we didn't receive any communication.
So, all in favor to close the
okay.
public hearing? Aye.
That's it?
Nope, now we're gonna discuss and then take a vote. So, I had a couple of concerns about it. It's actually gonna be fairly visible from a wide range of that intersection of the village. You'll be able to see it from across parts of St. Mary's Lawn. And it's going to be in front of, not only the house, you know, Peter's house at 191, but the other houses going down the street. So that's one concern, is the visibility of the shed in this non-conforming location that I have. The other concern is that there are no other sheds like this all along Chestnut and Morris through the village. There's one on Haldane that's sideways and it's further back on the Haldane property. It's kind of deteriorating where they keep their football gear, I guess. So this would be really the first shed facing the street like that.
But what do you mean by no sheds like that? Because the one in St. Mary's is almost identical to the one that I'm getting.
What I mean is the location of it.
Okay, because that's pretty visible from 9D. And
Yeah, that's
you can see that
also,
from my living room.
right, that's also visible from that same area. Although it's.
In fact, that's actually more visible than where my shed would be.
It's much further back from the.
It's further back, but you can see it from probably more houses than you would from mine. Mine you can see when you're coming up 9D along the edge there, but if you're driving down the street, you're not gonna see where I can see the gray shed for almost 2 blocks, 3 blocks, the one in St. Mary's.
Mhm. So
Mine you
that-
can see once you come on by my property, you'll see it.
That's the other shed, so I guess there are three sheds. There are a few other properties, that are, this property is unique in that it's a really hard place to find, it's really hard to find a place to put a shed on your property. So this is, probably the only place where you could have one that has access to the street. But there are other corner lots that don't face Morris, that have side yards where they could put a shed, and that would add another shed to the side. So those are my two concerns that I have about it. I think there's some characteristics about this lot that make it really the only location to have a shed that has access to cars or the sidewalk or the street.
Can you just, Aaron, restate, sorry, but I didn't really get it, the exact variance that's required here?
So the shed, looking at the site plan, we need a side yard variance for the east corner of the shed, or the east half of the shed,
Okay,
and then we need a front yard variance for the west part. So it's a corner lot, so there's two front yards
all
and
right,
then one side yard. It doesn't need a rear yard because the sheds are allowed to be placed in the rear or side yard setbacks as long as they're 10 feet from the property line.
okay.
There's the people with the gate. right?
So the,
So it's right there.
the front yard setback should be 25 feet, and it's actually
It's gonna be.
proposed to
it's
be
gonna
20. Is that the issue?
Right, so the front yard setback right here is labeled as 25 feet, and the shed is coming 5 yards into that, or 5 feet, I'm sorry.
And then on the other side, it should be 7.5 feet, but it's actually 2.5.
Mhm.
It should be 10, right, or no?
It's a narrow lot, so, well, that's kind of a question. A narrow lot would get a 7.5 foot side yard, but the part of the code that talks about the sheds doesn't reference narrow lot, and it
Hmm.
says 10. So I think if we like, if we're okay with the shed there, we just grant the variance, the larger variance, which would be the 10 foot.
One point that hasn't been brought out much is the fact that, and there's an existing shed which will be taken down.
Correct.
Right.
7 feet by 7, and it's right on the property line.
Right.
So that's a benefit of the proposed new shed, the removal of a more conspicuous existing shed.
Where's the existing shed?
It's-
Yeah,
It's
you
on
see
this
that
plan.
one? So this is below the street level mostly, and it's
Right.
also a non-conforming shed that does not
Right,
Have a-
yeah,
have a variance for
the
it.
different, this one is down
Closer to the
lower,
house.
you don't even see it
Yeah.
compared to the one that's proposed, which is really very visible.
And that's the reason, just on the visibility of the shed, I'm picking a good shed, I'm not going with, Home Depot special, I'm gonna invest in a shed that's gonna, I think, add, a little character, not so much to the village, but to a shed. So it's gonna be the best shed I could put there to make it almost, again, kind of, look, close to what I have in my house, from a standing seam, roof perspective, and, the color of the paint, so it's gonna really kind of not stick out like, just a new shed.
And the historic board will have to approve.
Yeah, they kind of recommended some styles that, they saw, cause I went down this path a couple of years ago, so they already had gotten, wind, and we had a conversation around the shed. So they pushed me towards the design that I'm proposing right here.
Peter, where's the tree? There's a big tree to the, looks like in this area right here,
That tree is right in the corner.
right here,
Right in that neighborhood.
right in there. It's on the high side or the low side?
It's on the high side,
High side, so there's a tree right here.
correct.
is that gonna impede access to your shed?
No,
Okay.
And you're not planning on running electricity or plumbing or anything?
Can you see the drawings for the shed? Oh, this isn't, okay.
Okay, is there any other discussion? Should we jump into our criteria? Let me, not totally prepared, let me pull this up. Okay, so to be clear, we're considering a side yard variance of it's gonna be 4 feet and 10 inches. And a front yard variance of 5 feet for a shed. So, is there any question about this being a type 2 action for secret?
I don't see it.
I don't see any question about that. So the benefits sought by the applicant can or cannot be achieved by other feasible means, any other feasible means.
Well, judging by our discussion of where it could be best located, it's hard to say that it could be achieved by other feasible means, apart from not having it at all.
Donald?
I don't know, you know, I mean, I guess it depends on what feasible is, but he hasn't got, he's between a rock and a hard place here, you know, there's really not a lot of places, it's, unless he puts it back down below grade like the other one is, it's, you know, it's gonna be,
Less
a
feasible.
change to the neighborhood, but he's gonna build the best shed ever, so it's not gonna be,
it's gonna be the best one I could afford, yeah.
you know, gonna go through historic review board, so. I didn't answer your question. Rambling, I don't know.
I'm gonna say, cannot. Simply because of the limited, if you wanna have a shed on the road, that's the only place you can put it. Grace?
I agree. If the goal is to have a shed with vehicular access, that's the only spot to really put it. Technically, you can put a shed in other places in the property, but they would not have vehicular access, and they would also still require a variance of some sort.
Eric?
I agree, there's no feasible other way to get the functions of a shed. Well, there is one way, and it's far less desirable, and that is to leave things sitting out with a tarp over them, which is what someone might be forced to do if they don't have a shed. tools, lawnmower, et cetera, and that would be, from the point of view of the village, that would be the less desirable approach. The shed is a better solution.
All right, proposed application will or will not produce an undesirable change in the neighborhood. I think this is the tricky one. I think in some respects it does produce an undesirable change. I mean, notwithstanding riding lawnmowers and bicycles piled in the driveway. It's the first or second shed of its kind, sticking out on the road like that.
And it's a bulk, you know, visibility wise.
I don't think you're gonna see it as much as you project in what you just said, because you look at my neighbor's property, they got two big columns that are pretty beefy that are up there and lit up at night with the lights around them and everything else. And if you look at the Google map, there's trees and other things, so maybe in the dead of winter, it'll stick out a little more, but I think it's gonna be, you know, people will see it as they get to my driveway. They won't see it before they get to my driveway. And if you're coming up Main Street from Lower Main, you'll see it, because you're coming up Main, but you can see a lot right there. You can see my kayaks in the back. But otherwise, you're not gonna see it until you kind of go past the driveway, or you come up Main Street.
I'm sure you visualized it much
I
better.
did, and
over
I
time.
took my many years to kind of put this in there, and very sensitive to how the village looks too, so. You know, what I did to the back of my house was very,
I'd like to
Yeah.
keep this moving, if you don't mind, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Eric?
I suppose, yes, there is an undesirable change. I would call it a minimal one, because really, when you boil it down, all we're talking about is a 5 feet difference of position. He's allowed to build the shed that he's talking about in a different position, and he just needs it 5 feet closer to the road. So that is the measure of the undesirability, is that 5 foot difference of position. And so it is negative, or it is undesirable, but it is not substantial. But that,
I don't think that's quite accurate, because he couldn't move it 5 feet back, he'd be off of his property line.
yeah.
I'm
And
not getting what you're saying too.
Um,
Sounded great, but I don't get it.
Well, he could rotate the shed, he could have it, make the shed smaller, but, all right. I just think it's what's really at issue here is the 5 foot difference of position. If it was 5 feet farther back, and a shed of some kind would be permitted without a variance. The variance behind the shed, the side yard variance is, doesn't have any bearing on undesirability to the village that I can see. That's more a matter for the neighbors.
You're talking about this portion, the front portion of the
Exactly.
shed. If this was pushed back to
Exactly.
the front yard setback line,
I think that's the critical
That's the
issue.
critical-
That's what really, that is, it's just that 5 foot difference that is what he's asking for. So, while that does, you know, it's less desirable, it'd be better if it was back 5 feet, it's still only 5 feet, and that's not a huge difference.
Grace?
I think the visibility of this is problematic, mostly due to its elevation. It's kind of exposed visually because you have that driveway that's open to the front, and I've walked by this property before. There's a lot of plant coverage along Chestnut Street up until you get to the driveway. And if I'm remembering correctly from our last meeting that was about the driveway gates next door, I think there's just low planting between the back of your property and the neighbors, right? There's nothing really substantial back there, and there isn't really room for anything. I mean, if you moved it visually, I think the impact would be better if it was in further up where it was a little bit lower, which I know is not ideal for you, but visually I think this is sort of obtrusive.
Yeah, it's gotta be street level, just for a snow blower,
Yeah.
reason number one.
And John, you jumped in and said the bulk, it was bulky visibility wise, do you wanna add anything?
Well, you know, I listened to the applicant, and obviously, like I said, he's probably visualized it for a longer period of time than I have, and I'm sure that changes in the season make a difference of how visible it might be from the road. That is to, since this is just dealing with undesirable effects to the neighborhood, again, where the shed was would be better, but not practical for the purposes that the shed's being, you know, put in place for. So, I think, you know, there's an undesirable effect of it, but there aren't many options here.
How do you get from the driveway down to the lower, how do you get?
I have a rock path from, the driveway down to my lower yard. It's like a rock garden path,
Okay,
kinda like put in by, Vidal Landscaping when they do a rock wall.
The variances are or are not substantial. John?
Well, it's sitting fully in the rear yard, 20-foot setback.
And it's allowed to do that. So,
So I would say otherwise, apart from that, with regards to the side yard setback of 5 feet, I don't see it being substantial.
um,
oh, me?
yeah.
Oh.
Sorry.
Well, it's a substantial side yard setback, but the reason it is because he's trying to pull it back as far as he can from, again, he's in a rock and a hard place. He makes more substantial side yard setback because he's trying to get out of the front yard. He's in a no-win situation. So it's substantial, but
Yeah,
there's no remedy to it other than putting the shed, as Grace was saying, down below, where the pie is a little bit, pie shape's a little bit bigger, but he's still gonna get into variance land, so.
Okay.
And what did you say the side yard variance is specifically, like 4 foot 3 inches, you said?
I did the math and I forgot. I think I said 4'10",
I don't get that one.
Yeah, we're.
maybe
yeah,
5 feet 10. Sorry.
It's listed as 4 feet 11 on the, it's shown on this plan. And it's
Yeah, right.
4'11".
Oh, you have the special plan.
There's a, the architect
Yeah.
just marked it
Yeah.
out as 4, it intrudes into the
Here's this.
setback area.
There it is.
This one.
This is the updated one.
There, that one.
And there's also,
As requested.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Oh, I get it, okay.
Now,
I'm gonna say it's not substantial. Grace,
I would say it's not substantial as well.
Eric,
I think it's substantial by numbers, by percentages, but not substantial by effect. Its effect is not substantial.
okay. Will or will not have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood. I will start and say will not have an adverse effect. I don't think that there's any environmental considerations with the stream that goes right by there. We're already parking cars all over that area. Physical conditions, I think we've talked about the bulkiness and the visibility of it. So, I'm gonna say will not. Grace?
I agree. The visual impacts we've already talked about. I don't see any environmental impacts.
Eric?
I agree, no impacts.
John?
I don't see any environmental impacts coming from this location.
Donald?
I don't know.
The alleged difficulty necessitating the variance was self-created, or I'm sorry, was or was not self-created. Grace, you wanna go first?
Since it's such a weird one. I mean, you don't need a shed, but you want a shed, right? Like,
Yeah, I
say
think,
it's like the definition of self.
I think in this question, we have to take into consideration what's possible in the area of the lot. I mean, to some extent, we know he bought the lot and he knew that it would be a hard place to put a shed,
Mhm.
so it's a self-created problem that he now wants one. But it's also, you know, not totally his fault that that's the way his lot is. I don't know.
There used to be a garage there,
Really.
Mm.
and I left some of the cinder blocks in the ground, so, from the outline still.
When you moved in,
Well, the garage wasn't there,
Oh.
but the cinder blocks
was there?
were there.
So what's your final answer, Grace?
I think it is partially what's the word?
Self-created.
Self-created.
Eric?
Well, in my understanding of this question, it is self-created. It's a choice to do something. So, yes.
John?
It's self-created, you know, you buy a certain lot and, you know, you're stuck with what you're buying. You know, if you needed a shed and if you felt like you needed a shed, you'd have to buy a bigger lot. But you pick this one, so in part it's self-created, that's the way I see that you come out with that answer.
Donald?
What John said.
I mean, because again, the other thing is that the shed could be put down into the lower aspect, so it's not visible, but this is the optimum location that the owner wants, and in part that's a self-created choice. It's between the two, even though one's less practical than the other.
I agree that it's self-created, and I think that's in part because of the decision to put in a shed of that size rather than moving it back, as Eric mentioned as a possibility earlier. And for the other reasons that you don't have to have a shed. And I do wanna make note though that it's a difficult lot to do anything in the backyard with access to the street. And well, Peter knew that when he bought it.
I think that's a good thing to actually hinge it, part of the decision on, that it's a very difficult lot in the sense that there's big grade change, which doesn't show up on the site plan, but is there. So he doesn't have a lot of latitude about where he's gonna locate the shed if he's gonna do it at street level.
I mean, that's an aspect of
And
the point, yeah.
And I think that's important to the balancing statement, because we wanna make clear the difference, the particular, facts about this lot that don't apply to the other lots down the street. All right, so do we wanna discuss, or do we wanna go ahead and have our vote, and then I will write this up and pass it out for, review?
Do you wanna just come to a general, rounding up of, the points?
Yeah, so, sure, we've decided that it's it would be hard to achieve by other feasible means. Between, some people said directly, no, not possible. There was some leaning towards it would produce an undesirable effect because of the bulk of it and how visible it would be. Eric brought up an interesting point that he could have made a smaller shed, and that really what we're only talking about is the 5 feet that's sticking into the front yard, and that would not make it that much more visible than if it were a smaller shed. I think that's an interesting part of that, that point. Generally, we decided that they were not substantial variances, although Eric qualified that by saying the effect was not substantial, but, the numbers were. And we decided it would not have an adverse environmental or physical impact on the neighborhood, and that generally it was self-created, with the exception of my comment that it would be hard to locate that elsewhere on the lot.
So does anybody else have a additional to add to the balancing statement of those 5 criteria, which is something that the courts have looked for in the past?
Do we have the grade change, knitted into that? I can't remember if you said anything.
Um,
That he has a very limited amount of, he doesn't have much leeway in terms of where he can locate this thing, because it's a big grade change. And it matters.
Let's add that into the feasible section.
In other words, if the grade was even right across, we might be talking, I'm sure you'd be probably,
I have other options.
you'd have more options about
Yeah.
where you
I
put
don't
it
have,
in.
yeah, it's not.
You might be landscaping there more and than the other, so. He's got a very limited area,
I think
if he
it's
wants
worth,
to keep it at street level.
worth noting, another one of the unique things about this situation is that the shed is proposed to be right behind the driveway where the car will be parked, part of the time at least. So, there's already a bulky object there, part of the time. And, so the shed is, going to be partly obscured or will kind of join in. I mean, that section of the property is already being used as a kind of storage or utility space.
That's a good point. So I would, I would say that I think a lot of the outcome of how the shed fits in is gonna be down to the historic review board and what kind of shed they approve. Part of that then, if once it's approved, is out of our control. You know, that we can't control paint color or some signage or decoration. I don't think the historic review board can do anything about paint color, but you're not gonna paint it pink, so
No.
we're okay
I
there
think
for
the
now.
last item I'm thinking off the top of my head, it's not a substantially tall shed. I mean, at 10-10, it sort of runs in the middle. I mean, there are other sheds that can be with barn-style roofs that are
Yeah.
taller.
How high is the shed at St. Mary's, do you know? Is that the same
I
height?
think it's taller. That looks taller than 10-10, but I didn't measure it, so I couldn't.
You talking about the donation shed?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. But I would say that's a different context though, you know, like as part of a church property versus a residential building, I would say like the visual language of it is a different consideration than this property.
Yeah, it's kind of dwarfed, isn't it?
And there's more open land at the church.
All right, would anybody like to make a motion?
Make a motion, that we vote based on the, the statements.
To grant or
Right,
to
deny.
deny?
Grant?
Okay, second?
I second the motion.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Hope it's worth it, you got your shed.
Didn't I? Is that it?
That's it, so,
Thank you.
don't put it up until you get a building permit, and you still have to go to the historic review.
So what would be the next step? Talk to Jeff or?
I'm gonna, I will write up the resolution, we're gonna review it, it's gonna go to Jeff. I'm gonna let the historic review board know that you've been approved for the variance, and so you can go ahead with them right away.
And what about the county checking in with the agreement on?
Yeah, I'm gonna check in.
Jeff, have Jeff do that?
Yeah, John first brought up a good point, which is we have not been doing that, and we may not need to because of an agreement with the county, so I'll take care of that.
And then the historic gets the approval to the building, for the building permit?
Yep, once they give you your certificate of appropriateness, then you get the building permit, and once you have that, then you can put it up.
Okay, but I don't have to file anything with them, you guys gonna pass
Well,
it
you-
along?
You're gonna have to meet with them, and they may
I'll meet
have
with
other
them,
things they
and
want from you.
I don't need to submit anything to them just yet.
Well,
You guys are.
they'll follow up with you and tell you
Yeah.
what you need to do.
Thanks. Okay, have a good night.
If you wait around too long, we're gonna find something.
I'm out of here. Good luck.
Is that your?
Oh, yeah.
Is it good for your copy?
Sure, put them together and I'll sort them out later. All right, Karen, come on. So, why don't you, start talking while I pass this stuff out, tell us what's going on.
Hello, everyone. I'm Karen Parks. I'm here representing the owners of 3 Rock Street, and they currently own a single-family residence in an R3 district, and they would like to, within the building footprint of their existing residence, compartmentalize a portion of it to create a 2-family out of the existing building. So there are no proposed plans to alter in any way the exterior of the building. There are no additions to the structure. We meet the required parking requirements for a 2-family, so there are also no proposed changes to the site as it exists. We do have an application before the planning board for site plan approval because we are converting from a single family to a 2-family, which requires site plan approval. But our application to them also illustrates that it's our intent to not make any changes to the site as well. So in the plans that you have, the site plan illustrates that we do meet the parking requirements, but we're not changing anything, so we're not requiring any setback or lot coverage variances. So the variance we're requesting is illustrated on the floor plans. The proposed second dwelling that we're dividing within the structure is less than 600 square feet, and the minimum livable area per dwelling unit is 600, so the proposed dwelling unit that we would be creating is approximately 560 square feet, and so we're requesting a variance to that section of the code. So it's best illustrated if we look at drawing EX1, shows the existing first floor plan, and drawing A1 shows the proposed first floor plan. EX2 is the existing second floor. There are no proposed changes to the second floor. So our construction is outlined. It's contained within the kind of southerly end of the house, and we're proposing to create a division between the units on the dashed line indicated on A1. And what's kind of driving that dividing line is both the function of maintaining the function of the main house. So we do have a pantry space which we'd like to continue to have dedicated to the main house, and basically then create a new, we'll have to actually create a fire separation between the 2 dwellings. So by doing so, we'll add a doorway in the hallway and create a new kitchen and open up a living room area. So the request for the variance is driven by both trying to minimize the amount of construction that we have to do within the existing dwelling, and also maintaining the pantry as part of the function of the main house.
Is there a limit on, a bottom end limit on bedroom size?
No, because I believe studio apartments are allowed in the village, so do you mean like the actual square footage
Yeah,
of
the
the
bedroom,
bedroom?
those look really
There's a
small.
livable area in the building code,
Yeah,
not in the zoning code, but the building code has minimums for room sizes.
right, and I
So,
believe
which I don't
the-
know, remember off the top of my head, but that's not, would be what we would worry about, or you would worry about that as a building inspector.
Right, and I believe the minimum square footage for a habitable space is 70 square feet with a minimum dimension of 7 feet in one direction, but I'd have to confirm.
The only one we're worried about is the zoning code issue,
Correct.
which you've got in front of us, which is the 600 square feet as opposed to, what, 560?
No,
or
560, yeah.
560. That's what the subject of this application is for.
Correct.
So you were mentioning, Karen, you're taking out, the pantry is gonna be part of the main building.
That's correct.
Okay.
As well as, it is kind of hard to see in this plan, but
No,
there
no.
is kind of a dashed line indicating how the two dwellings will be separated. And there will be access between the two, via a door, however, they will be two separate dwelling units. The door that we're adding in the hallway.
Looks like she's got a complete application.
Yeah.
Got a zoning board chart.
The only variance at issue is the amount of square footage of the dwelling area.
Correct, yes, yeah, and I did include a zoning conformance chart which, illustrates the existing, setbacks and coverage, and basically that we're proposing no changes with the exception of dividing the dwelling.
6-foot fence here.
Oh, you got something else now.
Yeah, this is, I think I got the wrong form here, this is about a fence.
Whoops, sorry. Did you get the form you needed?
No, I just got, oh, wait a minute, yeah, here, I got the conformance chart. That's it, yeah.
Any questions? We can go ahead and schedule a public hearing. Everything's in order. You've got an enormous list of people to notify because you're at the
do.
top of the hill.
Yeah, and I don't know if you wanna look at there's a tax map connected in case you need or want to add more, people to that.
I looked at it and it looked okay to me.
So stapled on the back of the application, is the tax map, and I've circled the lots that I've listed for neighbors.
So you circled the properties, the green,
Yeah,
that's
so
the one you're gonna notify?
that's what I've included on the list as of now, which are direct neighbors and people across the street. But if there's something else that needs to be added.
On the 18th.
Anybody have any concerns about the list?
No?
Do you wanna follow the public hearing of 21 Parsonage next?
Oh, you can't slip me in before that. No, it's fine, I'll follow it. I'll just come a little later.
Yeah.
We'll talk about, let's see.
No, that's fine. The 18th would be great.
Okay, so you know the drill. The only thing that's changed since the last time you were here is that we have the signs, public hearing signs
Okay,
that we picked up from Jeff.
okay.
And I'm not sure where you would put them on that property.
Yeah,
That's
down on the
interesting.
street.
Seems like, where's the driveway to get in?
So the driveway is on Rock Street and it's combined with the driveway for 7 Rock Street. It's one driveway, serves both properties, so I would say probably at the foot of the driveway on Rock Street, but.
And is there anything visible from the other side? Because you're notifying all the Forge Gate people.
could put it on one terrace, I guess, at the foot of the cliff.
But that's not your property, so,
Yeah, I mean, I guess that would be up to you, where the best,
I don't really know that property very well, it's kind of hidden.
yeah.
That's why it's such a good property, out of sight.
So when you drive around one terrace, the rock cliff that's on your left is
Mhm.
like the face of that property.
Oh, so it's right on
And
there. Oh, I see, so you could put one there. Anybody have a strong opinion about that?
About placing the signs?
I would just, my opinion would just do it on Rock Street. I don't think that, Orange Gate, I don't know, it just seems extreme to
Yeah,
be putting, I think it's more confusing than anything else. But Rock Street is a little community there, so I definitely get on Rock Street.
That's where the occupant will be coming in and out.
Yeah.
so let's put it on the driveway as long as if that's
Okay.
possible with the neighbor who shares it, and then
Yep.
if not, let me know and we'll figure something else out.
that's definitely possible.
Okay, so the rest of the drill you know, and I will follow up with you, with the, hearing notice
Okay.
very soon.
Okay, so I'm going to the planning board next week, and in terms of SECR, because we'll be having a public hearing here before them potentially, does that mean you would be the lead agency on that, or how does that?
Planning board usually takes it, I mean,
But
from-
clearly nothing's gonna be needed because it's just, I'll just confirm with Matt that
Okay.
he doesn't wanna do it and just say, no, you don't need to.
there's no real change in the structure other than the division walls.
Okay,
Thank you, Karen.
thank you.
All right,
So you have a couple weeks then. So then you'll email me the notice.
yeah,
Thank you.
good night, thanks for waiting. Does anybody, can we quickly go through this stuff? I don't wanna put this off, cause we're gonna be
Yeah.
busy for the next few weeks. Let's just do these, minutes, and then we can continue working on the application materials by email. So these are the minutes from, 21st of March. And Grace was not here, so we didn't get to vote.
It says, proposed shed in the front, rear, and side yard setbacks, but
It's not in the
the
rear.
rear was not an issue, wasn't?
I had that confused a couple of times. I would say, let's just say the shed is to be removed, the existing shed. We don't know what it's a plastic shed, I assume he's gonna give it away, not demolish it.
Yeah.
That the, planning board.
Yeah,
Okay,
I reused some paper on the back for these,
okay. Oh, I see, okay, I get it.
so it's,
Save a tree.
What?
Save a tree. So apart from, one notation that Eric made, I see no problem, I think the minutes are fine.
On page one, next to last line, it'd be read better if which was changed to where a merged lot is presenting many zoning issues.
Thank you. Anything else? Stop here, finish reading. Take a motion to
Otherwise,
approve.
fine.
Okay.
As amended. Make a motion to approve the minutes of March 21 as amended by Eric.
I second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye. All right. Minutes are approved. Let's adjourn.
That's it?
Adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Yes, this is the first application. One more Parsons.
John, I missed who made the motion to adjourn and who seconded. You guys are too
To adjourn the meeting?
Yeah.
Uh,
Didn't you?
No, we didn't.
no, we didn't.
You
I
did.
moved to adjourn the meeting.
I
I
second.
second it.
All in favor?
Thank you.
I thought that was omitted, but
You
I
guys
didn't want
are
to
too-
say anything if anybody else was going to say anything.
You know, I have not been fully trained in Robert's rules of order. Let's get one.